My mother believed and my father believed that if I wanted to be president of the United States, I could be vice president.
This is America.
Former Vice President Joe Biden has been elected President of the United States.
It is my greatest honor and privilege to have been your president. We will be back in some form.
We are still deeply divided.
Public health experts warned this was coming unless more was done. And here we are now.
Are you proud of what happened here today?
Absolutely.
Never before in American history has there been an uprising like this.
Of the 75 million Americans who voted for Donald Trump, I don't know how many today are feeling, dear God, what was I thinking? But I would wager a lot more are thinking, let's carry on this fight.
Character matters. It matters. Telling the truth matters.
The 21st century is going to be the American century. Because we lead not only by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. That is the history of the journey of America.
The idea of a famous person going into politics might seem like a new thing if you're watching the news, but in reality, US politics and fame have always been bound up together. Today on Irishman in America, Marion McKeone, our US correspondent and the US correspondent for the Sunday Business Post, walks us through the strange and wonderful history of celebrities going into politics and running for office. The reason we are talking about it this week, for starters, is Herschel Walker.
President Trump, he's a fighter. You know, ever since I've known him, he's always been a fighter.
How do you characterize his presidency?
Power, strength. I have to say that he did America first. His policies was absolutely incredible.
Marion, walk us through what exactly came out about this ex-football star running for Senate in Georgia.
Oh, hello, Jarlath. And where to start is the question with this. Herschel Walker was, to say he's a huge football star and icon in America is an understatement. He's not quite Tom Brady, but he won the Heisman Trophy, which is the greatest accolade you can get in American football. He was a brilliant player and he was a football hero. Now, there's always an interesting thing when it comes to Black American sportsmen, because unfortunately, they're not just judged by their sporting skills. And this is true also of famous Black musicians, actors, any Black persons who come to prominence. They're also judged by what they have done or not done to advance the lives of Black people in general. And, you know, I mean, you have like the most recent, I suppose, example being Colin Kaepernick, of somebody who really did sacrifice his career to, you know, in a bid to try and make things more equal, to focus on racial justice. Herschel Walker never did that. This is why the race in Georgia, okay, he's running for the Senate in Georgia. Now, Georgia has historically been a very red state. It has been dominated by white male politicians forever. And Georgia always votes Republican. The senators are always white men from Georgia. And that's just how it's been. But in 2020, Joe Biden, shock horror, won the state of Georgia. And not only that, but Georgia sent back 2 senators, one of whom was a Black preacher, a really, really smart guy, the other of whom was a young Jewish journalist. And this was, everybody's going, my God, what's going on in Georgia? But anyway, the Raphael Warnock, who was the very brilliant Black preacher, was a special election, which meant he only had 2 years, and now he has to go again against Herschel Walker. Herschel Walker, probably the best known person in Georgia. If you go there, and I've been several times, you know, it's the one name everyone knows because of his football brilliance, because of his career, and where he really put Georgia on the map for football. So that is the highlight of his career. A lot of Black people that I spoke to in Georgia said they wouldn't vote for him, and not just because they preferred Raphael Warnock as a candidate, because he's smarter, more articulate, he has clear positions on things, and he has been, you know, a very political guy all his life. But they said they wouldn't vote for Herschel Walker because when he had the chance to do something in Georgia where there was terrible segregation and racial injustice, he looked the other way. Now, he's always said, I was a footballer, I was never a politician, which is all very well until now he has decided he wants to become a politician. And that's where the kind of rubber really hits the road on that one, because, you know, it's perfectly fair for a sportsman to say, look, I don't want to get involved in politics, but now he's sort of retrospectively trying to justify that. But a more immediate controversy is he was discovered as a politician, if you will, by Donald Trump because he nearly played for one of Donald Trump's football teams in the Donald Trump Football League that never happened.
The hugely successful Donald Trump Football League.
That
Go
massive,
ahead.
that
huge hit.
Yeah, exactly. But they stayed pals, and Donald Trump decided he was going to endorse Herschel Walker for the Senate to become the Republican candidate for the Senate for Georgia in the 2022 midterm. So people kind of thought, like, the most sympathetic reaction, I think, was to say, look, this guy has, by his own admission, had mental health problems. He says that he has a dissociative disorder. He received several knocks on the head as a footballer. And again, by his own admission, he was never that bright a guy. And he was seen as somebody who was being used by Donald Trump and the Republican Party, and that he was being drafted into an arena that he had no business being in because of his lack of grasp of politics, because of his lack of interest in politics, and because of a very spotty personal record. The most immediate thing that came out about him was his ex-wife said that he had threatened to kill her repeatedly, and that on one occasion he held a gun to her head. He pointed it right up against her temple and told her he was going to blow her brains out. She was terrified of him. It has since emerged. Now, what amongst his very conservative positions are he's advocating a total ban on abortion, all abortions, no exceptions, from the moment of conception. Well, it has turned out that he's also one of these, touted himself as one of these family guys, morality, etc., etc. Firstly, it came out that he had 4 children by 4 different women, which, didn't really jibe with his whole family morality, etc. And then it turned out that it seems, and now I am always reluctant to quote another media organization as a source of a story, but so far it seems, and there's been no convincing denial of it, that he paid for a former girlfriend of his to have an abortion. She's also the mother of one of his children. He concealed this, and the Daily Beast first reported this story. He came out and he said it was a flat out lie and he was going to sue them. The woman, who has remained nameless, then produced a receipt from Herschel Walker for $700, which was the cost of the abortion, which was lodged 5 days after she had the abortion. And the check, she said, came in a get well card from Herschel Walker. Now, you can have a position on abortion and you're perfectly entitled to that position, but to be painting yourself as a completely no-holds-barred anti-abortion candidate when you have secretly paid for one of your girlfriends to have an abortion just reeks of hypocrisy. Now, also, it's turned out that in the meantime...
But Marion, he also claimed just not to know this woman.
Oh, that's right. Well, that was the classic Donald Trump line, isn't it? I don't know her. I don't think I ever met her. Oh, whoops, sorry, she's my ex-girlfriend and the mother of one of my children, but I don't know who she is.
That's even worse than a Donald Trump whoopsie, because this does, and you, a couple of times when I've brought this man up on the show, you have said, I don't know if we should talk about him because it's so obvious that he has such severe mental issues. This is a week where rugby players in the UK and Ireland have come out together, and new research has appeared about the impact of concussions in rugby. I mean, this is quite obviously the product of the concussions that he took, and maybe something else. Who knows? There could be something else there as well. I mean, there could be myriad of things taking place. But I don't know where it leaves us in this, because, as you said at the start, it did look like the Republican Party was taking advantage of his fame.
Absolutely.
And, that seems to be one of the big through lines in my preparation for today's show, was the idea that the fame can be, the coattails can be ridden. But what has to happen for Herschel Walker to step away?
Well, I don't think he will at this point, because there are a lot of Republicans in Georgia who will vote for anyone, including Christian Walker. It seems that his campaign is now in a shambles, but he has raised $12 million in the last about 3 months. And that is purely because he was always seen as, and again, this is where I feel huge compassion on one hand for him, because he is a man who has suffered by, as we said, by his own admission, a number of mental health issues, and he was exploited all his life by white men, basically, because we all know that white men are the ones who get really rich from black sportsmen always. That's how it has been through history, and it may be less so today, but it still hasn't been entirely wiped out at all. So he has, and the fact is that all, white Georgians who really support Donald Trump, and there are a lot of them, will all vote for Herschel Walker regardless, because they don't really care. All they want to do is not have a Democrat in the Senate for Georgia. It doesn't matter what he does, even between now and Election Day on November the 8th. They will still vote for him.
But Marion, I can't be the only one listening to you say that, who struggles to believe it, that surely there's a limit. Surely when it emerges about holding guns to people's heads, financing abortions, denying knowledge of a person, realizing, oh, actually, the mother of one of my kids, you don't think there's any limit?
No, and I think possibly what is quite damaging is not in these races, because, and I've said this so many times, and I think that it is borne out, the Republicans want power and want control of the Senate at any cost, and it does not matter who the candidate is, as is pretty obvious. If you look at their candidates, they will put them in anyway on the basis that they are not Democrats, and anything is preferable to a Democrat. We saw this now. It came very close in Alabama back in 2017, when you had Judge Roy Moore, it was known throughout Georgia, and I think I mentioned this last week, that he was a paedophile. He was a judge, and as a sheriff as well. He groomed teenage girls and coerced them and forced them into having sex with them. I interviewed so many people down in Alabama during that election, including mainly women, who were all saying, so what? He's a Republican, he's not a Democrat. You want one of those godless Democrats in? And also saying, it's different down here. You don't understand what it's like in the South. And women get married younger here and girls grow up quicker here. So therefore, a 35-year-old man grooming a 13-year-old girl, in the words of some women there, was not that big a deal.
Absolutely dumbfounded. Like, I think I was lost for words last week when you said that. But that's just facts.
But that is facts. But that is also how you will square the circle of a candidate who is wholly unpalatable, and you will make it like, it's okay because X, Y, and Z. Now, as it happened, Roy Moore was narrowly defeated by a really capable Doug Jones, who was the prosecutor for Alabama, who prosecuted the civil rights case, including the bombing of the church in Birmingham, where the 4 little schoolgirls were killed. He's an impeccable guy, but he was voted out 2 years later in the special election. He's no longer because he's no longer the candidate, or the senator, even though he was doing an excellent job, because he's a Democrat. And so they put somebody else in instead. So it's all, and this is where, even though Herschel Walker's son, Christian, who again, he's a 23-year-old young guy, he loves to be controversial. He's got a huge social media following. He loves to tweet the left and taunt them and, say things that are very, very far Christian conservative to the right. But he has now turned on his father and been tweeting things saying, you're not a family man. You left us to bang a bunch of women. You threatened to kill us. We had to move 6 times in 6 months running from your violence. That has come out in the last couple of days as well. And amongst other things that he has tweeted. But Herschel Walker, Lindsey Graham. Now, we all know that Lindsey Graham and principal are two or 3 words, to be precise, that are never heard in the same sentence, because he is so amoral that he will do anything and say anything to protect himself and to keep the Republican Party in power. Now, he has come basically to Herschel Walker's aid and said, look, kind of without saying, it doesn't matter. He may be a lousy candidate, but he's our candidate. He's our candidate. And guess what? We're going to vote for him because he's a Republican and we need a Republican in the Senate to take back power. So I think I will be amazed if he wins, because just that I think there are enough moderates maybe in Georgia, because I did meet a lot of them, but then there are enough Marjorie Taylor Greene, because remember, she's from Georgia and she was returned with 80% of the vote last time out in 2020. She's going to romp home again this year. So there's this mixture in Georgia. It's about 1/3 Black. It's about, I would say, maybe 10% moderate stroke independent. And then you've got, I'm going to say, I don't even know, but like certainly a minority of Democrats. But I think that there may be enough people who, like Judge Roy Moore in Alabama, may go, no, you know what? It's not just that he's a wife beater. It's not just that he's violent. It's not just that he has serious mental problems, which are not his fault. He's just wholly unsuited to being a senator. He's also the guy who spoke about getting China's dirty air flowing over America, and that, we couldn't have come from apes, because if we do, why do apes still exist? Now, again, that just speaks to somebody who maybe didn't get the chance to get a very good education, and by his own admission doesn't have a high IQ. He's pulled out of a debate that was supposed to take place on the 14th of October, because he feels, and he's correct, he would be no match for Raphael Warnock, who is a very brilliant, very articulate, formidable candidate when it comes to public speaking. So, but as I say, the tragedy for him is that he's allowed himself to be used like this and to be co-opted, and now he's being shamed and humiliated. And at the same time, balanced against that, I think, yes, he has done awful things. And I don't think you can, I know that concussion and brain injury can make people behave in ways, and they can cause them to be violent and irrational. But I think if you look at the total, as I said, the secret funding of the abortion, the denying the knowledge of the woman, his ex-girlfriend, this all adds up to somebody who isn't just suffering from mental disabilities, he's suffering from a big moral deficit, I think, as well, and he's wholly unsuited to being a senator.
So let's widen the lens out a little bit to, why is this pursuit of famous people as a shortcut to power taken off in the way it has? I mean, probably one of the most memorable signposts to what we're living through was when Judge Katanya Brown Jackson's Supreme Court confirmation hearing was taking place, and Senator Ted Cruz, went at her with his usual kind of way of questioning people in this position, and then leaned back in his chair and was seen to Google his own name in Twitter, to search his own name to see what reaction what he'd done had gotten. And probably the only thing that made this special was that we got to see it. We got to see it firsthand. I kind of come to this episode today, and I did go down through and go right back to, Ronald Reagan and Shirley Temple, and go, well, when did this begin, and when did it become identified and acceptable to ride the coattails of someone's popularity to public office in the States?
I think it's always existed. My theory, my prescription is America really needs a royal family, because if they haven't got one, they create one. They created a royal family where the Kennedys became quasi-celebrities, more celebrity than politicians, certainly with the later generations, where the craving for glamour and fame and beauty and success, and the Brits sort of package it all up in, and you might say glamour, beauty, success, they're all beauties, but they packaged it up in, Princess Margaret, the abdicator King Edward, or Diana, all of these people, they gave the British that fix of gossip and scandal and glamour, and yet they were these sort of figurehead leaders. America doesn't have that, so it creates them. So you now have the Kardashians, who are almost like their royal celebrity family, and a number of other families like that. But they have always, like, going back to, I don't know if the gang out there remembered Shirley Temple, but she was the child star, the American child star, with the dimples and the curls and the cutesy little face, who could sing and dance. And, she was in films from the time she was 3. She obviously outgrew her child star status, but she went on to become an American ambassador, and she was the ambassador to various countries, and she became political. And that was really, I think, the first one. The first really successful one was as you mentioned, Ronald Reagan. Because now we had other people. We had Sonny Bono, Sonny and Cher, I Got You Babe, etc., etc. He was part of, like, in the 70s, he was a big pop star with Cher. And then he went off and he went into politics, and he started off mayor of Palm Springs in California in the 80s. And then he went into the House of Representatives, or he tried to, I should say. And he was there for, I think, a couple of years when he eventually died in a skiing accident, as I recall. And I hope I'm right about that. But to get back to Ronald Reagan, yeah, Ronald Reagan he was political in as an actor, in that he was always very supportive of the sort of get the Reds out from under the bed and Senator McCarthy and all that stuff. And he then went into politics, and he, tried several times to get the nomination. He became governor of California. And from there, people thought it was ridiculous. And there he was being, clips of him in films with monkeys and all kinds of things, and showing how ridiculous he was. But he became a president. And to this day, any Republican that I know will hold up Ronald Reagan as the single greatest American president, even more so than Abraham Lincoln, the Republican president, more so than Abraham Lincoln. And he is revered still in Republican circles. And every year I go to this thing at the Ronald Reagan Library, where anybody who wants to become a Republican candidate, a Republican nominee for the presidential race, has to go there and has to deliver their pitch out in the Semi Valley, and basically get almost the seal of approval, or the beyond the grave seal of approval, or the nod from Ronald Reagan before their campaign is considered legitimate. It's quite amazing, really. So Reagan was, I say, he served 2 terms. He was, he was, whether you agreed with his policies or not, he was a very good communicator in a way that he could speak to American people. And there were Democrats who voted for Reagan because they were kind of seduced by his communication skills, and by the sunny optimism, and by the sort of all shucks demeanor, a sort of a benign demeanor that really concealed some very, very bad policies and some very discriminatory policies, and, did a lot of things that were pretty awful, basically. But the economy was booming and everyone was happy, and a lot of that stuff was overlooked. There were a couple of scandals. Iran-Contra, I think, was one that started on his watch, but he basically got away with it. He skated, and he's still, as I say, held up as one of the all-time American great presidents. So he was one that succeeded. So I suppose you'd put him at the top of a list of ones that succeeded. Arnold Schwarzenegger, weirdly, as everyone knows, decided back in, I think it was 2005, when Gray Davis, God love him, the most bland California governor in the history of California governors, because they like them sparky in California. They like a bit of razzmatazz and showbiz. He was recalled mainly because he was boring. I always felt it was to do with electricity and Enron and buying power and all kinds of gambling. And it really wasn't his fault that California was subject to these huge brownouts. He was recalled. Arnold Schwarzenegger was just one. Oh my God, I covered that race, Jarlath. It wasn't just Arnold Schwarzenegger. There was a porn star. There was Gary Oldman from Different Strokes, the very small guy from Different Strokes. There were a bunch of lunatics running. Ariana Huffington was another one. That was just Tracy Lord. It was one crazy person after another. There were about 14 candidates, and Schwarzenegger won, not because he was the best. He was the least crazy at the time and the most credible, which will tell you something about all the other candidates. As I say, he wouldn't even turn up for races, for debate.
What does it tell you, though? I mean, I feel like Schwarzenegger would have won just on the back of those movies that he made and how beloved he was. That, like, there's obviously, it is a cheat code that, like, if you can get famous and popular enough in one thing, you can traverse into politics, and that doesn't matter what country you're in. And in some ways, I wondered today, is that such a bad thing, that, like, if you can be really successful at something, that you can then go, maybe I can apply some of this magical pixie dust that's made my life so great to the world of politics. Well, what does it say about people's faith in actual politicians?
I'll give you Donald Trump to respond to that, because Donald Trump was really successful at one thing. He was really successful at scamming people. He was a con man par excellence. He was a serial bankrupt. He was a serial cheat. He was a serial stiffer of little contractors, and he was a serial bully. Now, he was very successful at all those things, and he did go on to become an American president that a lot of Republicans regard as having been exceptionally successful, so much so that a lot of them believe he is still the real legitimate president. So, there is, it's not, I don't
well,
think
let me come back there on that, right?
Okay.
Let me come back on that, because I in some ways, and this is going to sound crazy, in some ways, we've been through it a bunch of times, that if America had a proper democratic system that didn't have an electoral college, that man is just not president. End of story. Yeah. And it is the job of the voters to figure out for themselves if the person that is traversing from one area of success in life to this one, whether they're up to it. I just think that is it a sign of the decline in respect for career politicians that more and more across the world we're turning to people who have done well elsewhere? Do people just see the political system as broken in America, and that if anyone's going to fix it, it's got to be someone from the outside? And now, as you say, Donald Trump is the model for that and will forevermore.
Yeah, I think it depends on what the illusion you bring. Like Ronald Reagan portrayed himself in the movies as an American hero, this affable guy, the cowboy, the fighter pilot, the hero. Like the roles that he played in films were very palatable to Americans in a different way. So were the roles that Arnold Schwarzenegger played of this tough guy, Terminator, Hasta la Vista Baby, etc., like blasting any opponents out of the water. And that really spoke to that American swagger and gizmo and all that. And so I think with Donald Trump, this fantasy, and as we've said before so many times, Donald Trump is a poor person's idea of how a rich person lives. He's a poor person's idea. He's a loser's idea of success. Of somebody who's got all the girls, the planes, the yachts, the tacky apartments, the endless money. So, so that was the veneer that he brought, that he could win at anything. So I think that these are all seductive models in America, where the American dream is to everybody, if you work hard enough and you have this and that and whatever, you will succeed. Anyone can be a billionaire. And, and of course they're being sold a cup there. But anyway, and then you have other people whose shtick wasn't as well received. Cynthia Nixon from Sex and the City, and a very accomplished stage actress in New York. She ran for New York governor. It went precisely nowhere. She challenged Andrew Cuomo back not that long ago, a couple of years ago. One election campaign that I covered that I loved was Kinky Friedman, the brilliant country singer, poet, writer, author, comedian, like just all around larger than life character. He ran, it was back in 2004 thereabouts, to become governor of Texas. And as I said, I covered that campaign. I don't think I ever laughed as much in my life on any campaign. It was barking mad. And you know what? I think he might have been better, because he's a bit like a Willie Nelson, a crazier version of Willie Nelson, a more stoned version of Willie Nelson. He's a guy who wishes nobody any harm, a good Jew, decent guy. There have been so many attempts to draft Willie Nelson for governor of Texas, but I don't think
your favorite, yeah,
got any interest. And Matthew McConaughey, you saw, he toyed with it a while ago, and then wisely decided he wasn't going to run for governor of Texas, even though he was flirting with the idea. I think he copped on, thought, hey, I'm an actor. I don't think the skills are transferable. We have an awful candidate to become governor of Arizona, Carrie Lake. She was a TV news presenter. She was basically a host on TV news and current affair programs. She is to the extreme far right of Donald Trump. She has a lot of really disturbing messages and that she touts around the place. She's leapfrogging from her well-known position as an Arizona, news anchor. I hope it doesn't work. It may work. We have Dr. Oz, of course. There was Al Franken, who was a Democrat. He was a comedian. He was best known as a comedian and very smart guy, very witty, very clever. He was elected easily as a senator from Minnesota. But then in the Me Too movement, there was a photograph of him going on from his stand-up days, going to basically do a tour to cheer up the American troops. I can't remember. I think it may have been in Germany, but anyway, it was overseas. And he was photographed with his hands sort of poised over the woman who was traveling with him over her breasts, and they were kind of like, they weren't touching them, but he had that stupid, childish, juvenile, thing, and he's grinning at the cameras. Now, it was stupid, and he was forced to resign. I didn't think it reached the level of Me Too. I really didn't. I thought, yes, he should be embarrassed. He should apologize. But he was basically run out of the Senate because the Democrats wanted to appear like Caesar's wife. They wanted to be holier than thou on the Me Too thing. And I really didn't think that he deserved that.
I know the Al Franken story, we could probably do a full episode on that.
Absolutely.
But there does seem to be, like, Al Franken is a good one to jump in on there, because it does feel like there's nearly 2, probably 3 streams of famous person that jumps into politics in the States. And Kanye West is in one particular vein of that, the most extreme vein of that people view as utterly opportunistic.
Everybody says, who does he think he is? I just told you who I thought I was, a god.
Yeah.
That whether right or wrong, they view him using this really important structure within our lives as a trampoline for whatever it is that he's promoting at that point. Now, he had a very rough week this week in that vein, and I think it fed more fuel to that belief that anything he does, political or otherwise, is self-serving. He's not the first celebrity to do it.
Come on over to patreon.com/Irishman Abroad to hear the second half of this discussion. Get Marion's take on every celebrity ever to run for office and every politician ever to become a celebrity, including Clint Eastwood, AOC, Oprah, Clay Aiken, Jerry Springer, Roseanne Barr, and many more. Irishman in America is an Irishman Abroad podcast. Research and sound production by Jarlath and Regan. Special thanks to Tina and Mikey. You can get more from Marion McKeone this Sunday and every Sunday in the Sunday Business Post.